Hi, my name's Andy Clark and welcome to the Dirt Dude Conversations. I'm here today with Emeritus Professor Bob White from the University of Melbourne, author of a couple of books including this one, Understanding Vineyard Soils, and also Fine Wine into Soil.
Soils for Fine Wine.
Soils for Fine Wine, sorry, excuse me. Now please excuse us, we are in the heat of the Australian sun here out in the field, so we might make this brief. Look, welcome Bob. Thanks for joining me here in the vineyard.
Thank you, Andy.
Obviously you've got quite extensive experience as one of the world's leading soil scientists for viticulture. I guess the first question I have for you is what defines a really good soil? What's the ideal viticultural soil, do you think?
Well, as you know, Andy, it depends a bit on what style of wine you want to grow. Whether you're thinking of fairly large production per hectare, or you're looking for a very small crop of highly flavoured grapes. But to generalise, I suppose you'd have to say that you've got to have very good drainage, and you've got to have minimal inhibition of rooting, so that the roots can grow as deeply as possible and explore as large a volume of soil as possible. And this means that that soil shouldn't have any compaction layers or dense clay layers or anything like that in it.
Okay, and so looking at sort of probably let's look at it from a high quality, your concentrated flavour soils.
Yeah.
What are some of the highlights that you've seen around the world?
Well, if you follow the French paradigm, then the vines have got to struggle to a certain amount, and so traditionally vines in France were all planted on the slopes, and the flatland, the alluvial plains were kept for cereals, and that idea has tended to be translated around the world. You see, for example, I've been in New Zealand recently, and over there on Hawke's Bay and Martinborough area, they've got these gravelly terrace soils, which allow the vines to root very deeply, but on the other hand they don't provide much nutrition because there's a lot of gravel and stone in it, and that means that they've got to look after the fertilising of those vines very carefully. Yeah.
Okay. And from an Australian perspective, it sounds almost similar to some of the deep sands over clay in McLaren Vale and the like, and those sorts of things.
Yes. Australia manages to produce very good wines on a relatively difficult soil, you might say, and the Yarra Valley is a good example of that. We have a lot of these what we call duplex soils, which are sandy, loam texture, A horizon, that's topsoil, over a rather dense clay B horizon, which in the wintertime can get pretty wet and waterlogged and poorly drained. But we do, on the other hand, have areas in the Yarra Valley, Mornington Peninsula, and up in the King Valley, where there are these deep red loams, and certainly the vines can root very deeply on that. They're very well structured, so there's no rooting problems, and the thing that you've got to watch out for there, of course, particularly in the higher rainfall areas, is excess vigour, because the vines will just grow too well. I mean, vines left to their own devices are a bit of a weed, really.
Yes, I'm well aware of that one, don't worry. So in terms of how, I guess, practitioners, farmers and viticulturists or the like, how they're managing their soils, what trends have you seen over the years? Where do you see it going, I suppose?
Well, certainly there's been a very significant trend all over the world, really, to get away from what we call conventional viticulture, where they ploughed between the vine rows, they use herbicide under vine, and generally try to have the vineyard looking like a well manicured vineyard. Now we see much more of cover crops, swards of grasses or mixed species growing in the mid-rows. Growers are trying to minimise the amount of herbicide they use, so they will tend to use mulch under vine. They will even, in some cases, let the cover crop grow into the vine row, and they're trying to minimise the use of synthetic fertilisers and going more for composts, composted manure, for example, and from the phosphate point of view, reactive phosphate rock, for example. So they're much more concerned about not only the quality of the grape, but also the impact on the environment.
Yep. So that's almost more of that sort of holistic biodynamic and organic approach.
Yeah.
How do you see the difference in the effects on soil from an organic or biodynamic approach versus conventional?
Well, there's no reason why conventional growers, as they are doing, can't adopt the best practices from the organic viticulture, which is essentially getting as much organic matter back into the soil, particularly in the vine row, as they can through using composts and mulches and so on. There's a lot of certain amount of mythology, I would have to say, about biodynamics, in the sense that biodynamics should be essentially organic viticulture, that is, no herbicides and no synthetic fertilisers, but plenty of organic matter. But in addition to that, what the biodynamics people do is to use special preparations. And those special preparations can be, well, made in various ways, certainly, but they're applied at very, very low dilutions, so that one has to ask the question, are those preparations themselves going to add something to what the normal organic procedures are adding? Can you change the biodiversity or the species composition of the microorganisms in the soil with these special preparations which are applied at such low concentrations? And the evidence so far is, and there's been quite a lot of work done on this in North America, for example, that the biodynamic preparations don't add anything extra to what you can do with an organic approach to managing your vineyard.
Yes. And so there's still, if you're utilising the practices from a soil perspective within a conventional vineyard of organic practices,
yes,
you could theoretically have the same results as running an organic system?
Absolutely. I'm sure that and there have been various vineyards around the world which have demonstrated that. I mean, some organic biodynamic people don't want to become certified, for example, through some certification scheme, because it paints them into a corner, particularly when they have a really bad season of disease. Yes. Which happened here in 2011.
We're also having the same issue again this year.
Well,
maybe
you are, yes. And for example, I've recently visited the Craigie Range vineyards in New Zealand, and they're grown conventionally, but they use the best practices which are available to them. And I think they're doing a very good job in terms of the proof of the pudding is in the wine, because they're highly regarded. Yeah.
Okay. And in terms of, I guess, the latest trend, and from well, not so much trend, but one of the latest measurements for soils is the biological component of soil, and which is still, I guess, a bit clouded in how that can be measured. What do you see as the role of the microbiology within the soil, and to lead into another point, its potential effect on terroir?
Yes, the microbial terroir is very fashionable these days, and no doubt about it, driven from people in California and to some extent in New Zealand as well. My view is that provided you're putting adequate amounts of organic matter, of the right kind of organic matter, and usually this is going to be a composted material. It can be grape mark, for example, or composted manure, for example. Chicken manure is quite popular.
What about straw and things like that?
Well, you can mix those in as well, because if you've got poultry manure, for example, there's a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus in that, so that tends to counteract the effect of straw in mopping up nitrogen, for example. So I think that provided you're doing that in terms of your organic inputs, you will have a diverse microflora in the soil. The other side of it is not too much herbicide. I mean, glyphosate's come in for a bad name these days, but I think the evidence is that if you don't overuse glyphosate, then the effect on the soil microorganisms is minimal. And so if you're doing these things, you will have a healthy soil microflora. Now, whether there are specific compositions of the microbial population in the soil which give a particular terroir effect expressed through the taste of the wines, then I think the jury is out on that. I mean, it's a bit like stamp collecting, doing this work on the microbial flora. They've got the techniques, the rapid techniques, DNA profiling and so on, but they haven't really linked the results of that composition analysis that they do through metagenomics to particular functions in the soil which will affect the way the vine grows and the quality of the grapes. That's still to come.
Well, it's such a complex organism, as a complex entity, with the number of microorganisms that are actually present within the soil. So terroir in itself, I think, it's a very complex system that
it keeps wine writers occupied writing reams of stuff about terroir without knowing too much about it. But one thing I will say is that there may well be an effect of the microorganisms on taste and growth of the vines. That hasn't been explored far enough yet. That's a new field which has opened up, particularly in the last 5 to 10 years or so.
Yeah, but before we get swallowed up by the flies that are sort of harassing us at the moment, I guess a couple of other questions, sort of one from the past and one for the future or the present. But what was it that actually, what drove you towards viticultural soils?
Interesting question. It happened about 25 years ago when I was on a field trip with a group of scientists, and we went to a vineyard in Western Victoria, and the vineyard manager was talking all about the above ground parts of the plant, and the soil management was very rudimentary, and I thought, here is an opportunity for me with my soil science knowledge to have an input into an industry which is really a progressive industry, and many of the people are tertiary educated, so they're receptive to new ideas. So I decided to go to California to tool up on viticulture. That was in 1999, and I've enjoyed working in that area ever since, and it's enabled me to visit various places around the world that I probably never would have visited before. So, and it's been very rewarding too, very rewarding. And the people in the industry are lovely people.
Some of them.
No, I haven't met a dud. I haven't met a dud yet.
No, it's quite an open industry, I think, in a lot of ways. And like you said, it's generally speaking, people coming with a fair level of understanding from the ground level.
Yeah.
Well, so on that, I guess in the time that you've been in, so the last 20, 25 years within this industry. Who is it that's sort of, are there any practitioners out there that have sort of really shown innovative ideas, or that you follow or you keep in touch with, and sort of see where they're at with it, following the cutting edge?
Yeah, well, there's a former student of mine, of course, Rob Bramley in Adelaide, who has brought a heck of a lot to the understanding of spatial variability and how that can be used to the benefit of the grower through selective harvesting or selective treatments and so on. In terms of people, I mean, here in the Yarra Valley there's some very good people. I mean, I've just spent some time with Rob Sutherland of Di Bortoli, and of course I've spent time with you too, Andy, and the sort of things that you've been doing generally on difficult soils, I must say, have been innovative and progressive. People on Mornington Peninsula, for example, they've got, the people that on the red soils down there have got it easy. They just have to watch out for the excess vigour problem. And as I said, I was very recently in New Zealand, and they took me down to the Martinborough district. And there, of course, they've got totally different soils. These gravel outwash terraces from the mountains, laid down at different times. It might be 50% gravel, so deep soils, physically relatively easy to manage as opposed to your duplex soils here, but requiring nutrition.
Yeah. Sorry, Bob, we might cut it off there. We're about to get swamped by a helicopter.
Oh.
Thank you for the conversation.
It's a pleasure.
And it's been great talking to you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
lovely.